this is Coast Guard guidance. This is not a regulation, just for
Yes.
the record. But it does state in section B that any submersible carrying six, I'm summarizing, 6 or more passengers needs to be certified and inspected under subchapter T. And then in section C, it talks about submersibles carrying less than 6 passengers and that they could serve as uninspected vessels. Is that consistent with your understanding, sir?
Yes.
I want to make a note for the record, and also call up, when you get a chance, Lieutenant Steele, 46 CFR Part 175. And just as we pull up that's just a federal regulation. I don't have it submitted as an exhibit, but I want to point out for the record that 46 subchapter Part 175 was updated in 1996 to clarify that any submersible carrying 1 or more passengers has to be inspected by the U.S. Coast Guard. However, that NAVIC was still in effect at that time.
Yes.
Were you aware of that regulatory change, sir?
The change, no, I was not. No.
At this time, I'd like to pass the questioning to the NTSB. Mr. Muse?
Thanks, Mr. Neubauer. I have a few follow-ups, and I apologize for bouncing around a little bit,
Yeah.
going back to this morning. So, and we just talked about Cyclops a little bit. Which class society was it classed under before Ocean Gate?
I can't honestly say, but it was classed. I really don't know, but it was definitely a classed vehicle beforehand.
So after that,
Yes.
what was Cyclops missing that would preclude it from getting classed?
So the issue with Cyclops, because what happened was when they purchased the vehicle, they ripped it all apart. So the hull was all one piece. The control system, I wasn't actually there when that happened. It was years before. And I think this is where the involvement of APL at the time, they came in and obviously helped out with Ocean Gate to modify that submersible. Now, to keep a sub in class, you have to annually do a certain set amount of tasks with the surveyor witness to basically sign off on that. Now, that sub had been out of commission. I don't know for how many years. I'm sure that information will be readily available. I do not know at this time. But they did so many modifications to it, it would have to, excuse me, it would have to fully go to a panel to get them to sign off and everything, but that was not the intent of Ocean Gate. Cyclops 1 was going to be used as a test bed to actively trial new equipment. So it was constantly going to be evolving and changing. That involves cost, and I know Stockton was very aware of the cost implications to do that. So hence why he decided to go down the route and get the hull and the acrylic signed off.
These class surveys, in addition to the material condition of the sub, do they get into operations such as training, communications, navigation, those kind of things?
Some of the agencies do. I mean, when they come along, we have everything out in front of us. In terms of, I know more recently, over recent years, not last year, but recent years, the surveyors will come out. We have to have everything from, we basically do all the battery maintenance. We have to, they've got access to everything from that we do to the sub in terms of any maintenance on batteries, the hull, any of the components. And they have dive plans. They have access to everything that's in there, who the crew were. So they have access to all of that. I have seen in the past where the agencies will come along and ask to see the dive records of the individuals that are actually diving the subs. and you've got to physically show them a log, or if you're actually using something that's on a system where you can actually key in the information, everything is all on an electronic database that these surveyors can actually look at. So they have full access to that at any time.
And these are class surveyors, not,
Yeah,
but how
absolutely.
about national regulatory agencies like the Coast Guard or MCA?
Negative, no. As I said, on any of the submersibles I've worked on, no Coast Guard have came along and actually inspected the vehicles themselves.
The pilot training manual that we saw earlier,
Yeah.
was that a class requirement? Or is there a standard that it has
It's a
to meet?
standard. You have to have the manual that you showed was pilot training manual, which basically encompassed all the knowledge to be able to get somebody trained up as a pilot. The manual you showed did not show the operations manual. That's another thing that the class and agencies do look at. Yeah.
Okay, I know the American Navic gets into a little bit of pilot training. Is there other nations that require that kind of training?
And in terms of the pilot training,
Yes, sir.
in terms of
Such
submarine
a-
rescue,
an MCA endorsement or
no,
nothing
no,
like that?
no. I know 2 years ago, the Australian authorities, what they were looking for, this was 2 years ago when I was down in Australia, and they decided to change their regulations. Now, AMSA, which is the Australian Maritime Safety Committee, what they decided to do was they decided that anybody operating, especially one of the vehicles that I'm trained and in date to pilot LR5, which is a submarine rescue vehicle down in Australia, that we had to do like a seaman's course, like a bosun's course, to actually show that we can do navigation. So yeah, the company, James Fisher Defence, paid for everybody to do that. But that they are the only nation that I know of that insist on that.
Earlier, you talked about each manufacturer having its own training or licensing program.
Correct.
So given the circumstances of this accident,
Yeah.
do you think it's such a requirement by nations would be beneficial, or is it needed?
Proper training.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Oh, it's imperative. You can't. I know Stockton's vision was, give somebody these PlayStation controller and, within an hour they're going to be a pilot. It's not the way it works. It's like showing somebody how to fly a helicopter and then putting them in charge of taking passengers up or doing work with it. It's so important, training, and it's not overnight. I mean, as I said, for myself as a submarine rescue pilot, it's very in-depth. It's going above and beyond just doing a standard passenger submersible. With this, we are doing dry transfer. We are locking on to a submarine at depth and recovering people, which we do on an annual basis with all the systems, all the nations do. And, for one of the organizations that I work for, with the experience that myself and my colleagues have gained in that industry over the past 23 years, one of the companies I work for, Mansub International, we've developed this training program for foreign military to employ our services, and we will go out and take submariners and train them up, and it's a rigorous training program, and we will give them the basis to safely pilot that submersible. We will give them all the training material and all their years of experience. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's a long process for us to deem those individuals capable and competent enough to be able to do the task at hand of going down, mating with a submarine, military submarine at depth, and doing hatch openings. It's quite a procedure.
So that's happening now.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
is there a need for a regulation or an IMO requirement to have that training, or is it industry doing an adequate job as it is?
I feel just now Triton do their own house submersible pilot training program. U-Boat Works, another manufacturer, they do training courses in Curacao. I think it's like a 3-week training course. Their courses are a lot shorter than what myself and a lot of my colleagues did. I mean, with us, it took years to get up to a competency level where we could safely land on a military sub. So I have never sat down and reviewed any of these manufacturers' training manuals to say, oh, I think that's sufficient or not sufficient.
Okay. Regarding contingency plans, we talked about a little bit about Andrew Doria, but not specific to that case. The ROVs and the divers that you have listed in your plan,
Yes,
are they actually informed about what's going on? Or is it
Absolutely.
just a,
100%.
it's not just a list of phone numbers that you have?
No, not at all. So anytime we formulate it, basically it's a dive plan before you actually leave the shop. And we would let them know exactly what we're going to be doing. So if there was an issue, we would discuss the area, whether it would be a wreck or an area of interest that we wanted to go to. We would show them the lay of the land, the obvious hazards that are marked on nautical charts. We would do all of that, all of
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Is that a class requirement or is that an
Negative.
industry
It's
standard?
not
Is
a
that
class, not a class requirement. No,
okay? Is that just your practice to do that?
absolutely.
Is it an industry-wide practice to do that?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. In terms of the organisations I work with just now, most of the companies have got a second asset on site, whether it be an ROV or whether it be another man-submersible. So we have our own self-help plans so that we know what to do. We regularly do training so that we can do emergency recoveries. We do recoveries with ROVs, with the other sub. We do training all the time to run through drills, procedures. We do a lot. We do a lot.
Was any of that required by Coast Guard Sector Boston?
Not that I know of, no.
Did Boston require anything for?
No.
I believe Andrea Doria is actually in Woods Hole's area of responsibility. Did you remember talking to them?
We were going out from, the only individuals that we spoke to at Woods Hole was the Alvin team. So they were another point of contact for us to actually resort to. They have vessels at, what's the name of the area again? Sorry.
Woods Hole.
Yeah, Woods Hole. So they were aware of what we were doing. We actually, at the time, we paid them a visit as well, got a tour of the facility. That was prior to carrying out the operation on the Doria. So they were aware of what we were doing, but the US Coast Guard in Boston, they were the ones that we informed that we were going out from Boston Harbour, returning to Boston Harbour.
But not the Coast Guard in Woods Hole.
Negative. No.
Okay. I'll fast forward a little bit to your report again.
Yep.
It looks to me something similar to a shipyard punch list.
Yep.
A little bit.
Yep.
So before that, did you or your crew have a chance to witness the electrical checks and mechanical checks of each component as they're getting installed in this new submarine?
No. This is in Titan.
Yes.
No.
How about as systems are coming together, do you get to witness the commissioning of those systems, like the life support and the ballast?
No, and you will, so in terms of the life support, the only integration I had with Stockton at that time was to go into the sub and test his scrubber for him. That was the scrubber that we showed up on the slide, the homemade one. I never actively was involved. I can't speak for the contractors that worked for me at the time, but no, I wasn't involved in the construction. It was all in the hands of the engineering team. The submersible itself, the percentage of it was done in the engineering side of the workshop, which I wasn't allowed to go into, and I was told several times. And then the vehicle itself, as it was coming to fruition and almost complete build, it got moved into the operations area.
Was this your first new construction submersible project?
From scratch? Yeah, because, well, as an involvement as in the position I was in, I've been involved in new projects before. submersibles that have never seen the water, you know, from proof of concept. I've been involved in that, but not as a director of marine operations.
Is it
yeah.
normal for operations to comment on the commissioning procedures as?
Absolutely.
How about the sea trial procedure, what I call sea trial procedures?
Absolutely. 100%.
That didn't happen at?
No.
Okay. I believe that's all I have. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, sir. Just to follow up on that, were you with Ocean Gate when they started sea trials for the
No,
Titan submersible?
I was let go beforehand. From memory, I think they went out March. I think March was when they first put the submersible in the water, and that was in Puget Sound. So, and the legal correspondence, the Ocean Gate's attorneys at the time, I stated this to OSHA, and the Ocean Gate's attorneys at the time went back to OSHA and said, we will not be operating this vehicle in US territorial waters. They did. And I, several times, said to my caseworker, they're diving this, go down. It's on social media, they're down there all this week. And nothing happened.
Was it your understanding they meant commercial operations or testing operations or any?
Testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that made clear that it was testing operations?
When I say made clear, this is everything I was reading on social media that Ocean Gate were putting all over the internet, showing that they were actually diving down there. I can't state who the crews were or pilots.
Okay, thank you, sir, for that clarification. So this is potentially testing the submersible in U.S.
Potentially,
waters?
Yes, yeah.
One thing I forgot to ask you,
Yes.
so were you involved in the registration or flagging of process or verification for any of the submersibles you operated on?
Me personally,
Yes, sir.
no. I mean, I may be speaking out of turn, but I think a lot of that was to deal with the naval architects and the project managers. They would deal with that. Yeah.
Were you aware of whether the Antipodes or Cyclops was registered or flagged?
They were. Right now, I can't remember, truthfully. Yep.
Do you remember a discussion ever coming up about the Titan's registration or flagging?
I said I was kept out of everything after the Doria. They kept me away from the entire project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
No problem.
Are you okay to keep going? We have one
Oh,
other,
gotcha.
or would you like
Yeah.
to take a break?
Absolutely.
Okay, sir,
Yep.
at this time, I'd like to pass the questioning over to Mr. Fawcett.
Thank you, Mr. Lockridge. My name is Keith Fawcett. I'm a Coast Guard Marine Casualty Investigator. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I would like to also clear up a few things from your testimony. So we've heard discussion that originally the titanium used for the domes and rings were going to be grade 5. They later were, they used grade 3 titanium.
Yes.
Did that cause you any concern?
I didn't even know. I had no indication whatsoever that they were changing the titanium. I was all out with my remit with the company.
So 3 times, to my knowledge, in this testimony, Mrs. Wendy Rush has been, her name has come up.
Yeah.
What was her role within Ocean Gate or any of its subsidiaries while you were working with that company?
So, from memory, she was leading the Ocean Gate Foundation. And I'm not sure at the time when Wendy actively took over as the communications director, but Wendy was in the shop a lot. She was at the facility quite a bit.
Was the foundation co-located with the, where the company was located, or was it in a separate location?
That I'm not sure. I don't know whether they worked remotely at our facility. I'm not sure where the company address was for the foundation.
Yesterday's testimony, they were talking about the foam that was placed between the hull liner the carbon fiber hull and the sleeve that fitted into the submersible. Are you aware that foam was used?
See, when I was there, they were using that HDPE. I would need to relate to my notes. It's basically chopping board material. That was in my safety report. You'll see the material that was used for the flooring. That was the one that I did the flame test on, which was emitting the dangerous fumes. And when I was there, from memory, they were actually using sections of that to basically shim out the inner sleeve from the carbon itself.
Would you typically find that in a manned submersible, the use of that type of material?
Absolutely not. That material, there are plastic materials out there that are fire safe. They're not going to emit enough fumes. That material, they genuinely purchased that from Home Depot. It was the worst grade of, I'm no expert in HDPE, but it was appalling. That is what they use, the cheapest plastic. And the same on the inside of the sub as well. And I can't speak for Titan that went back out. They were putting 3M carbon fiber tape over control panels to make it look, I don't know what they were trying to achieve. Anyway, that material, I took that outside and did a flame test with that. I'm not saying it was 3M, but it was a self-adhesive carbon-looking tape. It could have been from anywhere. And you'll hear in the voice recording, I mentioned that as well. The fumes that were emitted from that it was a lot. It was dangerous, put it that way. So yeah, I was under the assumption that they'd actually used this HDPE and were using rods at the side in between the inner sleeve and the carbon hull itself to space it.
And you mentioned that oxygen was admitted into the hull during diving operations?
The oxygen was actually, well, that's the thing. I did no diving operations with that submersible, but when I was there, we had internal batteries kept under the floor, and we had the high pressure oxygen tanks under the floor as well. Now, it's in some submersibles, even the class submersibles, some of them, you can have the O2 cylinders inside. There's nothing wrong with that. They had basically stored this, the cylinders in the bilge next to the batteries, and I mean the batteries weren't covered over. The cabling that they used was not like a fire retardant material in any of their submersibles. I'm sure Patrick, when he comes up next week, he will discuss the type of material they use in the inside of the subs for build and design. But that material is there, so no fumes are given off in the event of a spark, a low power spark or anything like that. None of that was in there. The batteries were completely exposed, and then they had the cheapest HDPE flooring put down, and they basically bought sheets of this stuff, cut it out, and slotted it in place.
So have you, as a submersible pilot, ever operated an experimental manned submarine?
Do you want to go back to Cyclops? Because it was, even though we had the hull and the viewport done, it, I suppose, was in a way experimental as well because of the amount of modifications and continual progress of the way APL wanted to operate it. I don't know, could we class that as experimental or, I don't know.
Yeah, that was
Other than that, no, absolutely not.
When you say experimental, do you mean unclassed, uninspected? Or
yes, a prototype that's not been proven, classed, or inspected as an experimental.
No, just Cyclops one. But the thing is, even when a vehicle is actually going through class and the build's approved and pressure tests are done, when the manufacturers fully build these submersibles and the pressure tests are complete and everybody's happy with it, then you go into manned testing. Now, at that point, during manned testing, there is no final completion sign-off from the classification agencies. So at that point, I'm not going to call that experimental. It's all known and proven products that are going in these vehicles, but there's no full classing of a vehicle until all that testing phase has been complete, from harbour trials to sea trials.
And then would you describe Titan, based on the information that you know, as an experimental manned submersible?
Yeah, but it was an experimental submersible that they had already taken deposits to go to the Titanic in. So, yeah.
And what would be your concerns with carrying passengers who are not intimately familiar with submersible operations on an experimental manned submersible?
Well, as you've seen from all my correspondence and dealing with OSHA, I was very concerned and I didn't agree with it.
So I'm not going to ask Lieutenant Steele to pull it up, but yesterday we did pull up the dive operation risk assessment for the 2023 Titanic expedition.
Okay.
It listed a set of steps and procedures that would take place before diving operations. Did you have a similar operational risk assessment procedure prior to the Cyclops 1 diving on the Andrew Doria site?
I can't speak for what was shown yesterday. I was flying at the time, and unfortunately some of the Wi-Fi would drop in and out. I never saw the document that you produced yesterday, but yes, there was a risk assessment carried out prior to every day's diving. And contrary to what Tim was saying yesterday, doing the risk assessments and the toolbox talks the night before, I never did it the night before. You do it the day of. Weather changes, current changes, vessel's condition changes. I mean, anytime we're doing operations, we have to get the verification from the captain, from the engineers, to make sure that their support vessel, the launch vehicle itself, there's no issues. If there's any issues with that, with an engine down or high pressure, an HPU down for the hydraulics for operating an A-frame, we will have to do a toolbox on that separately and discuss the risks in doing so. So with regards to OceanGate, absolutely. When I was there, we did toolbox talks and risk assessments on the day of the dives themselves, not the day before.
Turning your attention to the June Andrew Doria mission,
Yes.
there's a term that has been used in conjunction with that, Argus expeditions. Do you know what that is?
That's the thing, and when we were speaking about it earlier on, I remember the name at the time, but I had no involvement, and I'm not sure. I mean, could you possibly tell me, because I'm not sure what it is. What is Argus Expeditions? Can I ask that question, please?
Could you
Mr.
pull up-
Fawcett,
Yeah.
you shouldn't speculate.
Right, so if you would pull up Coast Guard Exhibit 078, that's the OceanGate April 2016 update newsletter. And while that's being pulled up on the bottom of the page, I have no idea what it is, and that's why
Thanks.
I'm asking.
No worries.
But while the lieutenant's pulling it up, and I will read from it to make it
Okay.
easier.
Yeah.
It says, OceanGate entered into an exclusive contract with Argus Expeditions to conduct submersible expeditions for individual explorers and affinity groups. These expeditions will explore iconic shipwrecks, hypothermal vents, deep-sea canyons, and rare biological events around the world. The first of these expeditions is scheduled to survey the wreck of the Andrew Doria near Nantucket in early June, which 2016.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking if, like, on the vessel you were on,
Yeah.
were any of the personnel, was the vessel, did it relate to Argus
Not that I know
Argus
of.
Expeditions?
No, not that I know of. No. In terms of the having it on their newsletter, I mean, I tended not to read the newsletter. So no, I don't know. And I never had any involvement with, from what I can remember, anybody from Argus Expeditions. I don't even know if it is an actual organization. I'm not sure.
At the bottom of that page in the
Yeah.
same exhibit, you see what looks like the Lars platform or a similar platform
Yeah.
with a vessel towing it
Yep.
through the waterway. Does that appear from the voyage you undertook going out to the Nantucket site?
No, that boat's tiny. That's a very small boat. That looks like something that was used in Puget Sound. That's not a ocean-going vessel by the looks of it.
So I want to talk about towing for a minute.
Yeah.
So the Titan was towed on the Lars platform by the Polar Prince.
Yeah.
At one point, they jogged for weather and proceeded a couple of 100 miles away from their intended position, and then eventually went down to the Titanic wreck site, almost 300 miles from St. John, more than 300.
Yeah.
Is it typical to tow on the surface a submersible on a platform for a distance of 300 miles in
No.
your experience?
I wouldn't say that's normal at all. No. I mean, I know Mr. Catterson was talking about the vehicle itself. Anytime we would take it out, even if we were taking it out in Puget Sound and doing a dive, traveling a couple of miles, if there was even a little bit of chop on the surface, the submersible would be ratcheted down so it would actually be firm, flat, and stable on the Lars platform. And as Mr. Catterson explained yesterday, it will just move with it. There's no, unless it was really bad weather, which you would not take that platform, in my eye, you would not take it out or tow it out in bad weather, because at that
If it's a
point, if the straps
submersible
are
on a
not securing
platform
that vehicle
for
to
a
the deck,
distance of
it runs a
300
risk
miles
of,
in your
of
experience?
damage. I wouldn't say that's normal at all. But no, it's not normal towing anything like that out 300, 400 miles. No.
And then on the Andrew Doria mission,
Yes.
pardon me, there was a mission specialist, Renata Rojas.
Yes.
Did you tell her that you recommended she not participate in Titan submersible operations?
No. And I will, for the record, since I was made redundant or fired from OceanGate about a week, 10 days before, my attorney at the time's got a copy. I probably still got it. And I got a text message from Renata stating, I need to look for it, but it's along the lines of, what the hell is going on? You have to tell me what's happening. Now, I spoke to my attorney at the time when I got it, and he said, do not. I also got somebody from the media got in touch. This is all within a matter of 2-3 weeks, say, of me being terminated from the company. And somebody from the media getting in touch saying, what's going on? We need information. Same again, my attorney told me, do not talk to them. So I didn't. So no, I've had no communication with Renata, and no, I did not tell her not to dive in the Titan submersible. And considering the Titan submersible nothing had even been fabricated, there was basically nothing. It was nothing. It was still in the design phase when we did the Andrea Doria mission. So no, I would not say that to her.
So I don't have too many more questions,
Sure.
but I do want to ask you, you mentioned medical quals
Yes.
related to the various, you mentioned there was an offshore qual and so forth.
Yeah.
To obtain that qualification, because I want to make sure we're not talking about the ability to provide medical assistance like emergency medical technician.
Yep.
Does this mean that you got a physical from a medical doctor?
Yes.
Which produced results which gave you a particular qualification?
That is correct, yes.
So looking at, while you were working for OceanGate and training pilots,
Yep.
qualifying pilots
Yep.
through the training and qualification book,
Yep.
was Mr. Stockton Rush a qualified and certified manned submersible pilot?
According to the company, yes, he was. And as I said, the individual that trained him, and I'm not 100% sure on the name, Scott Cassell. So you would need to speak to him about what sort of formal training he put Stockton through. And I'm not sure if, I'm not going to speak for for Mr. Carterson. I don't know whether he was involved in any training of the Cyclops, no, correction, with the Antipodes, because Tim used to manage and operate that vehicle for years before. So he had a vast amount of experience on that, and I'm not sure whether Stockton or Guillermo, who was one of the other co-founders of the company, and I know he had dived this up, I don't know whether they went any formal training with these gentlemen. I'm honestly not sure.
So in your position, did you maintain the formal training records for submersible pilots that were qualified to operate the company's equipment, such as manned submersibles?
That I did when I was there, yes.
In those files, did you have a qualification or certification letter for Mr. Rush?
No.
Just a few final questions. Did the company require submersible pilots to be chemically tested to make sure they weren't using substances?
No.
And I was going to say substances such as those that impair performance?
No.
Did they have a requirement that people who were going to operate the submersibles undertake a physical to determine if they had physical conditions, which might, since they're going to be deep into the ocean with the care of passengers, but for example, that they weren't epileptic, had a heart condition, had other medical conditions?
So with regards to working for OceanGate and working with the other systems, we take passengers in the subs a lot, scientists, media. They have to state that they're physically fit to go into the submersible, but they are not even required to undertake any sort of physical examination before we take them into the sub. With regards to, as I mentioned earlier, some of the organizations that I do work for, they insist that you have a very specific medical carried out to perform your duties as a pilot. And some of them require an ENG1, some require STCW, some require an HSE diving medical with a offshore oil and gas medical. The list goes on. Some do, some don't. So there is no across the board where everybody does the same. Every organization is different.
But specifically for OceanGate submersible pilots?
So in talks with, because when I came across, I had, even now, HSE, commercial diving medical, to do my submarine rescue, and at the time I think I had the STCW, I had that one as well, and I spoke to the CEO and the COO regarding medical for anybody that wanted to go in the sub with regards to pilot training, and it was knocked back because of the cost. It's quite expensive to get a HSE diving medical, and it's quite a thorough medical to get that done in the US. I think the last time I was with amalgamating the STCW one, it was like $700. So the company wasn't willing to pay for the trainee pilots to get that certification. As I said earlier on, I never qualified anybody the entire time I was there. I had the three individuals, as I stated earlier. I had Isabel Johnson, Alexandra Russell, Bonnie Carroll, and then we had the astronaut, now board member of OceanGate, Scott Perezinski. That was it. So, but not one of them got qualified as a pilot.
So my final two questions.
Yes, sir.
Was there any written procedure or policy that discussed the use of over-the-counter medications or other substances for submersible pilots that may impair their performance?
There was something in the employee handbook, yes. And I don't think it stated submersible pilots. I just think it was OceanGate staff. There was something in there. I don't have a copy of it, but from memory, maybe Bonnie will be able to follow up with you if she has a copy. But yeah, there was something in there regarding that, yes.
Fatigue can impair human performance to the same level of being intoxicated.
Correct.
Was there any written procedures about reducing the effects of fatigue for operational personnel?
It may have been in the same manual, but I can't say for sure without actually reviewing it again. I don't know if we can get hold of that document. There may have been, there may not.
Thank you, sir.
No
Captain,
problem.
that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Fawcett. Mr. Lockridge,
Yes.
just have a couple more questions in regard to that thread. During your employment with Ocean Gate, were you aware that the U.S. Coast Guard requires a merchant mariner's master credential for the operation of all passenger vessels, including uninspected passenger vessels?
No.
Was mariner credentialing ever discussed at Ocean Gate?
Anytime I brought up the Coast Guard, everything that Stockton and the CEO would say is they had Mr. I can't remember his name, Underwood or whatever it is, the retired admiral. He was going to see us through all the transition of Ocean Gate's operations and obviously the Titan build as well. But no, there was no. I know Stockton was very against. He was very against qualification because it costs money. He was very against even the pilot training manual and operations manual. He was against that as well. As I said, he thought a pilot should be able to come along and learn something from a day, and then they were sufficient. So he obviously got a lot of bounce back from me on that. So it never happened.
Did you ever see a Coast Guard individual at the Ocean Gate headquarters?
Never. No, not from memory. No.
And I mean, by individual, not the employee that you mentioned before, but a marine inspector or...
Maybe, I'm just trying to think about when Matt was working for us. He may have brought individuals from the Coast Guard in to see us when he first started. That's something you would need to ask him. I've just got this vision of two gentlemen from the Coast Guard, but I think it was around about the time of Matt, so it may have been friends.
And to clarify, that was likely not in a professional
No.
capacity
No,
for an inspection?
yeah, likely not.
And sir, a couple last questions about, you had mentioned Rear Admiral John Lockwood,
Yes.
retired.
Yeah.
What was your understanding of his role for Ocean Gate?
Do have a document. Do you mind if I find it and have a look? And it was basically a publication that was, it's in there somewhere.
Is it a press release, sir?
It was a press release, yes. So I don't know whether that's considered a factual document.
Is it a press release related to his hiring?
Yeah.
Uh,
You have that.
I'm familiar with that document.
Fine. Yeah.
Please proceed.
If you may know more about it than me, it may be worthwhile. I understand that without looking through for it, it was. In fact, let me see if I brought it.
Yeah. Mr. Lockridge,
Yes.
actually, rather than referencing the
Yeah.
release, I'd like to understand your perception of his duties, and including your interactions.
Yeah, I mean, he may have been. So the company like to have people of influence, okay, on the board, and hence why they went down the route of putting Scott Perezinski on. That was after I left, astronaut. Admiral Lockwood. When Stockton explained to me about the Admiral being on, it was to help with the transition of, how would I say, smoothing over the relations with the Coast Guard regarding the company. It's difficult to remember the exact wording, but yeah, I mean, to help us out, basically. He was brought on and part of the board of directors to help the organisation out and provide guidance and assistance with regards to the integration of the submersibles and the community, the public.
Did you ever have any direct interactions
Yeah, I met him on a couple
with
of
Admiral
times.
Lockwood?
Yeah.
What was the nature of those interactions?
He was in for a board meeting, which I was never allowed to attend. Board meetings.
But did you ever discuss any operations, regulatory compliance?
Truly can't remember. I remember talking to him. I think one of the times that in fact, I remember one of the interactions, and I'm sure it was Admiral Lockwood, when Stockton was showing him and some of the other board round the workshop, and I was just about to start doing an annual inspection of Antipodes submersible with ABS. And I had which is what we do, standard practice, I had all the life support out on tables. You're just basically going through to make sure that the emergency life support, the food, the water, all that safety equipment, which will allow you that time frame where you can stay on the bottom in the event of an emergency or the weather closes in. Can't remember what Antipodes was, whether it was 72 hours or 96 hours, but I do remember having everything out. And that day, Stockton was on one as usual, walked past me with all these bigwigs and stated we're not having any of that in Titan. And I was quite taken aback. And I said, what do you mean by that? We're not having any of that in. It's a complete waste of money. So I think at that point, in fact, there's no think, I know at that point, I says, well, I can tell you right now, I will not be one of the subpilots that will be going in that submersible. If you're saying now we're not having any emergency life support in the sub, it's critical. It is critical. Anyway, he was, in my eyes, showing off in front of some of the board. That's what he was doing. So
I don't understand when you say showing off, because
Like-
it's not going to need that.
well, that's
Is
what
that-
he said. Yeah. I think he was just, I don't know, showing his power, whether it be an ego thing or, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not sure, but I'm sure Admiral Lockwood was part of that party that he was walking through the workshop with when I was doing that inspection of the life support.
Was there any opposition to that statement voiced?
Oh, opposition to my statement or his?
No, to the Mr. Rush's statement that would not be needed.
Oh yeah, I was quite vocal and said a few swear words.
Was there any opposition by the board members?
They never said anything. And it's the same when, remember I was explaining earlier on about the incident with Alexandra when Stockton had her in tears when we were in the marina in San Francisco. Guillermo was there, Wendy was there, all these other people. And I think one of the other board members, they never said anything. They saw it was bullying. He was basically bullying her in front of everybody. And she was physically in tears. Mr. Carterson was there, and I hope Tim remembers it. It wasn't a nice situation to be in. And that Stockton, and I can speak about him because we're under subpoena, he was a control freak. That is it. It was his way or not at all.
Thank you, sir.
No problem.
We are nearing the end of the questioning, but before we do a final round,
Yep.
I'd like to take a 10-minute recess and reconvene at 3:35. Ocean Gate, are you ready to proceed, or should we wait? Okay. Did you want to meet? Okay, great.
All right, I'm back. Just waiting. I took care of text messaging. Um,
This hearing is now back in session. Before we begin or recommence, I'd like to add Exhibit 100 to the record. And this is a transcribed or transcription of the meeting on January 19th, 2018, where Mr. Lockridge met with Mr. Rush and other Ocean Gate employees about termination of his employment. That entire meeting was recorded and has been transcribed for the record, and will be available in this investigation as Exhibit 100. At this time, I realize we have a couple final questions, Mr. Lockridge, from the board. Lieutenant Commander Williams?
Mr. Lockridge, earlier you mentioned experience with GRP or graphite reinforced plastic. Was that on a submersible? Were you involved in any of the maintenance or inspections for that submersible? Can you please explain what some of those inspections were?
A lot of it was when I started with the company, that hull was actually getting phased out. But we, after the changeover from the GRP to the steel hull, sections of that hull were thoroughly inspected, and it was shown no signs of any damage to it. But no, in terms of the hull itself, I'm not sure what the operational life was for the GRP hull. As I said, that was before my tenure with the company at Submarine Rescue. But yes, I was involved for changing it over, and we could actually split the hull. And when I say split the hull, it was in several sections, because you had the diver lockout area on the back, which is the section that we would land on top of the submarines with. But once you'd removed the command module and the segment interface, you could physically see the condition of the GRP there, and also the GRP, the condition of the ceiling face for where the viewport would go, and the upper hatch as well.
And how thick was that submersible?
It was thick. I can't remember offhand, but I can get you that information.
Is it fair to say that there was a cycle life that was predetermined, and once that cycle life was hit, that's when it was replaced with metallic?
That is correct. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. You also mentioned earlier that when you were hired on, you were told that the thickness of the hull was supposed to be somewhere between 7 inches and 10 inches thick.
That's correct.
We all know that it was 5 inches thick. Do you know how the determination was made to go from the 7 inches to the 5 inches?
I think there's comment in my dismissal interview, and I can't remember whether it was Tony Nissen that said it or Stockton Rush, and something to do with being overkill, being too thick, something to do with the safety factor. We didn't need that kind of safety factor, and I think the initial, I mean, that's the thing, I had no interaction with Boeing, but Stockton relates to this conversation he had with Boeing that said it has to be yay thick, 7 to 10 inches. And that was them basing it on a really good safety factor. Obviously, because of the unknown, it's carbon fiber, it's not really used for manned submersibles. So Boeing stated that, and Stockton would relate to that all the time, saying that they were over-exaggerating what their calculations were. I'm sure when the Boeing representative comes, he will be able to keep the board right on those calculations. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
I'm done with my questions.
Thank you, Commander Williams. Mr. Lockridge, I just had one final question related to maintenance of the submersibles you were familiar
Yes.
with. While the submersibles were not being used,
Yeah.
what was your experience in regard to storage of those submersibles?
The two submersibles that I operated with Ocean Gate, they were always kept inside the facility in Everett, so which was climate controlled.
What about other submersibles you've been involved with over your
So
career?
in terms of the other subs, I mean, obviously if we're out in a big long operation, especially with the rescue subs, they're big assets. They will sit out in all weather conditions. Those are steel-hulled vessels. In terms of a long-term storage, the only operation where I've been out to carry out piloting and operational maintenance is with the Singapore submarine rescue system, which is permanently based on a vessel. And that submersible sits in a hangar. It does have doors on it, and the submersible itself does get air conditioning fed inside it to control the climate for the sensitive electronics. But that hull itself is not exposed to the elements, but it's exposed to the heat and the humidity that exists in Singapore, just with the way the hangar is actually constructed. There's no permanent doors or roller shutters on it. Every other submersible, it's kept indoors.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I'd like to ask if OceanGate has any questions for Mr. Lockridge.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any final questions from the board for Mr. Lockridge at this time? Mr. Lockridge, thank you for your testimony. Is there anything you would like to say to the board before we convene for or adjourn for the day?
I do. I would just like to close off with a statement from myself. As part of this investigation, my family and I also hope to find out the reasons why OSHA did not actively address my concerns regarding OceanGate and the submersible Titan. This is especially troubling given that I was under the supposed safeguard of the whistleblower protection scheme at the time. In my opinion, OSHA failed not only my family financially and emotionally, but stood by and did nothing to prevent further acts of retaliation from OceanGate whilst under the Seamen's Protection Act. I believe that if OSHA had attempted to investigate the seriousness of the concerns I raised on multiple occasions, this tragedy may have been prevented. As a seafarer, I feel deeply let down and disappointed by the system that is meant to protect not only seafarers, but the general public as well. Additionally, I believe that the participation of last year's OceanGate operational team in these proceedings would have been invaluable in addressing numerous unanswered questions. I sincerely hope that no other family will have to endure a similar tragedy in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lockridge, you are now released as a witness at this formal hearing. Thank you for your testimony and cooperation. If I later determine that this board needs additional information from you, I will contact you directly. If you have any questions about this investigation, you may contact the investigation recorder, Lieutenant Kelly Steele.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This hearing is now adjourned. Tomorrow there are no proceedings scheduled, and we will reconvene on Thursday at 08:30 here at the courtroom. Thank you.
Pug. It's a song right here, Pug. I'm gonna get you.